The British Empire was the most powerful force on Earth. Its warships ruled the oceans, its soldiers conquered continents, and its flag flew across vast territories around the world.
Through this pass, we can flank them by dawn.
The risk is too great. We must hold our current positions.
In the 1700s, almost no one could imagine that a collection of small colonies on the eastern coast of North America could ever challenge such an empire, let alone defeat it. Yet in those colonies, anger was growing. Ordinary citizens were becoming frustrated with British control, British taxes, and British soldiers marching through their towns. What began as political disagreements slowly transformed into rebellion, and rebellion eventually turned into one of the most important wars in human history. Farmers became soldiers, merchants became revolutionaries, and civilians risked everything for an idea that would change the world forever: freedom. The American Revolutionary War was not simply a conflict between armies. It was the birth of a nation, the destruction of old loyalties, and the beginning of a new political age. It reshaped global history and created the United States of America. Before the revolution began, the 13 British colonies in North America were growing rapidly. Stretching from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south, the colonies were home to millions of settlers who farmed land, built businesses, traded goods, and established thriving towns and cities. Places like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York became major centers of commerce and culture. Many colonists considered themselves proud British subjects. They benefited from British trade networks and protection provided by the British military.
Outrage. We cannot stand for it. Order, sir. Parliament has decreed it just and necessary for the defense of the realm.
However, tensions between Britain and the colonies increased dramatically after the French and Indian War, which lasted from 1754
without consent. Parliament imposes a new
to 1763. Britain defeated France and gained massive new territories in North America, but victory came at a tremendous financial cost. The British government accumulated enormous debt and decided that the American colonies should help pay for the war. To raise money, Britain introduced new taxes and laws on the colonies. Parliament passed the Stamp Act, requiring colonists to pay taxes on newspapers, legal documents, paper products, and printed materials. Additional taxes were placed on goods such as tea, glass, and paint. The colonists became furious, not only because of the taxes themselves, but because they had no representatives in the British Parliament. They believed that a government should not tax people without giving them political representation. Soon, a slogan spread throughout the colonies: "No taxation without representation." Protest groups formed across America, including organizations like the Sons of Liberty, which organized demonstrations against British authority. As resistance grew, Britain increased its military presence in the colonies. British soldiers were stationed in cities like Boston to maintain order and enforce British laws. Many colonists viewed the soldiers as occupiers rather than protectors. Tensions between civilians and soldiers escalated constantly. On March 5, 1770, anger exploded into violence during what became known as the Boston Massacre. A crowd of colonists surrounded British soldiers, shouting insults and throwing snowballs, rocks, and debris. The frightened soldiers eventually fired into the crowd, killing 5 colonists. Patriot leaders used the event as propaganda to increase anti-British sentiment. The situation became even worse in 1773, when Britain passed the Tea Act. The law gave the British East India Company special rights to sell tea in the colonies, which many colonists viewed as another attempt to control them economically and politically. In Boston, resistance reached a breaking point. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists boarded British ships anchored in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of crates of tea into the water in protest. Britain reacted harshly with the intolerable acts, but instead of crushing resistance, these punishments united the colonies more strongly against Britain. In April 1775, the first major fighting erupted at Lexington and Concord. Colonial militias confronted British troops attempting to seize weapons and supplies. No one knows who fired the first shot, but within moments gunfire erupted and the Revolutionary War had begun. British troops faced heavy resistance from colonial fighters attacking from behind trees, walls, and buildings during their retreat. The revolution was no longer a political argument. It had become war. Soon after the fighting began, colonial leaders created the Continental Army and selected George Washington as commander. Washington faced enormous challenges. His army lacked training, supplies, uniforms, and weapons. Many soldiers were inexperienced farmers with little military knowledge. Britain, by contrast, possessed one of the strongest armies and navies in the world. Despite these disadvantages, Washington understood that victory did not require completely destroying Britain. He simply needed to keep the American cause alive long enough for British political support for the war to collapse. One of the earliest major battles occurred during the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. Colonial forces fortified positions overlooking Boston, and British commanders launched direct assaults against them. Although the British eventually captured the position, they suffered enormous casualties. The battle proved that colonial forces could stand against professional British troops. As fighting spread, opinions about independence changed dramatically. A major turning point came when Thomas Paine published Common Sense in 1776. Paine argued passionately that monarchy was unjust and that America should become an independent republic. His ideas spread rapidly throughout the colonies and inspired many undecided citizens to support revolution. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence, primarily written by Thomas Jefferson. The document announced that the colonies were no longer part of the British Empire. It declared that all men possessed natural rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America was now fighting for complete independence. Britain responded with overwhelming military force. Thousands of soldiers and warships arrived in North America. British commanders captured New York City after defeating Washington's forces in a series of battles. The Continental Army suffered major losses and retreated across New Mexico, Jersey. During this desperate period, Washington made one of the boldest decisions of the war. On Christmas night in 1776, his army crossed the icy Delaware River during a snowstorm and launched a surprise attack against Hessian troops stationed in Trenton. The victory revived American morale. The war was extremely harsh for ordinary soldiers. They marched long distances in terrible conditions, often without enough food, clothing, or medical care. Disease spread rapidly through camps and killed thousands of troops. One of the darkest moments occurred during the winter at Valley Forge. Washington's army camped in freezing weather while suffering from hunger and shortages of basic supplies. Yet despite these terrible conditions, the Continental Army survived and became stronger through training and discipline. A crucial turning point came in 1777 during the Saratoga campaign. British General John Burgoyne attempted to divide the colonies, but American forces surrounded and defeated his army near Saratoga, New York. The victory convinced France that the revolutionaries had a realistic chance of defeating Britain. France formally allied with the United States in 1778, providing money, weapons, troops, and naval support. This alliance dramatically changed the balance of power. As the war continued, Britain shifted its strategy toward the southern colonies. British leaders hoped to regain control there, but resistance persisted through guerrilla warfare and local militias. American commanders slowly exhausted British troops, while Britain struggled with financial costs and declining public support for the war. By 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia. He expected support from the British Navy, but French naval forces blocked British ships from reaching him. Meanwhile, George Washington and French troops surrounded Yorktown. Cannons bombarded British defenses continuously. Cornwallis eventually realized his position was hopeless. In October 1781, British forces surrendered. The surrender effectively ended major fighting in North America. In 1783, Britain formally recognized American independence through the Treaty of Paris. The United States of America officially became an independent nation. The revolution had succeeded against extraordinary odds. A collection of colonies with limited resources had defeated the world's greatest empire. The impact of the American Revolution extended far beyond North America. The ideas expressed in the Declaration of Independence inspired political movements and revolutions around the world. The revolution influenced the French Revolution and independence struggles throughout Latin America. Concepts such as liberty, representative government, and individual rights spread. The American Revolution was not simply a military conflict. It was a battle of ideas, identities, and visions for the future. It transformed colonies into a republic and subjects into citizens. Through suffering, sacrifice, and determination, the revolutionaries achieved what once seemed impossible. From the battlefields of Lexington, Saratoga, Valley Forge, and Yorktown emerged a new nation that would change the course of history forever.